Welcome to the channel, where legends are minted, mysteries are struck, and today, we unravel a story so strange, so layered in secrecy, that it might just rewrite everything we thought we knew about modern U.S. coinage. What if a small mistake made it one of the rarest coins ever struck? A 2022D Roosevelt Dime, seemingly ordinary yet quietly carrying within its rim a saga of betrayal, oversight, and numismatic curiosity that continues to torment and thrill the most seasoned of collectors. Picture this, late 2021, Denver Mint. A time of rushed quotas and pandemic-era production pressure, machines groaning under demand, eyes strained from 12-hour shifts, and somewhere amidst that chaos something went wrong, or maybe more unsettlingly, exactly as someone intended. Because when early specimens of the 2022 dime emerged, whispers began, not of value but of violations, of uncanny traits that should never have passed inspection, anomalies, layered like secrets from shadowy doubled devices dancing beneath. Roosevelt's eye to ghostly die clashes that hinted at improperly polished dies, but it didn't stop there. Oh, no, because some dimes bore mint marks that didn't align with any known configuration, DS that floated too high or too deep, or were partially missing as if hiding, and then came the chatter about planchet flaws. So oddly shaped they resembled fingerprints frozen in metal, fueling a theory that these weren't just errors but the remnants of lost die trials, tests meant to be destroyed, accidentally or perhaps deliberately fed into circulation, and while the mint stayed quiet, citing generic operational anomalies. Collectors were already knee-deep in rabbit holes, parsing confidential reports, dissecting metallurgical data, finding inconsistencies not just in strike quality but in composition itself. How did one dime weigh just off enough to raise suspicion? How did another carry the faintest impression of an old 1980s mint mark beneath its 2022 surface? Like a relic possessed, and all the while stories emerged, whispered between coin show tables and tucked deep in forums cloaked in usernames and anonymity, of specimens found with invisible initials, designs that shimmered differently under UV light, or lettering that when rotated hinted at micro-engraved messages. Some dismissed it as pareidolia, others swore it was deliberate, and then came the retired mint employee who, in a now-deleted post, claimed the dime was the result of a machine that had never been publicly acknowledged, a prototype press with multi-directional striking capabilities meant for experimental currency, its existence denied, its test runs buried, yet the 2022D dime may be its only surviving echo, even more unsettling. Multiple examples show slightly different Roosevelt profiles, subtle deviations in cheekbone structure or hair curl density leading to whispers of multiple dyes being mixed in a way no protocol supports. And what of the batch that showed signs of lamination peels, resembling the outline of an eagle not part of any dime design since World War II? Or the one instance where a collector documented a dime with partial reverse mirrored under its obverse, as though the coin had remembered another identity. And as these riddles stack, we find ourselves staring not just at a minting error, but at a chronicle of missteps or messages, or cover-ups. Why were certain roles quietly recalled by banks without explanation? Why do the Mint's official production logs have gaps that coincide exactly with the days these dimes were likely struck? And what should we make of the FOIA requests denied on national security grounds? Yes, you heard that right, national security over a 10-cent piece, unless of course it wasn't just a piece of currency, but a breadcrumb from a story that reaches deeper into the vaults of the U.S. Mint than any of us have dared dig. And with every coin pulled from circulation, with every oddity logged, we are forced to confront the possibility that the 2022D Roosevelt dime isn't just an error. It's a cipher, a numismatic anomaly that challenges the very notion of oversight, of history, of what gets buried and what accidentally leaks into the hands of a grocery store clerk or a child's piggy bank. So keep your eyes open, your magnifiers ready, because this mystery is still alive, still unfolding, and who knows, maybe the next strange specimen is already in your change jar, just waiting for the right pair of eyes to unlock its story. And if that story ever sees the light, If the full truth behind the 2022D Roosevelt Dime finally cracks open, it might not be because of a high-profile expert or an institutional confession. It might be you. The everyday hunter, the late-night roll searcher, the weekend flea market wanderer who spots the slanted serif on the L in Liberty, or the peculiar tilt of Roosevelt's bust just off enough to suggest a misaligned hubbing pass, because more are surfacing one by one, each more bizarre than the last, one with a crescent-shaped indentation near the rim, perfectly smooth like a tool mark from a process that shouldn't have touched finished coinage. Another with microdots around the edge like the remnants of a deleted security feature, and still others with what appear to be partial reverse designs pressed at odd vectors, as if struck mid-ejection. What kind of mechanical failure leaves that kind of fingerprint on metal? Unless it wasn't failure at all, but experimentation, something rushed or hidden or never meant to be signed off. We can't ignore the theory anymore that perhaps this dime was part of a broader secretive test, maybe tied to new coin materials. Maybe a foreign contract or even worse, internal sabotage by a disgruntled technician trying to expose something deeper, darker. There's precedent, after all, for covert political statements hidden in coins, initials tucked into feathers, expressions changed subtly, even unannounced design shifts to test public reaction. And when experts began comparing these 2022 dimes under SEM magnification, new abnormalities surfaced. Microscopic abrasions under the portrait, unreported dye polishing marks that resemble letters or numerals in the punchline. Some of these features only appear under specific lighting angles or frequencies, raising questions about whether these coins were struck using non-standard dyes, possibly hardened with experimental treatments that left behind physical signatures. Never seen in circulation-grade strikes before, the rabbit hole just keeps going. And while the mint has made no formal statement beyond the usual within tolerance, internal memos leaked to investigative collectors hint at damage control efforts, reassignments and digital trails wiped from production logs. Meanwhile, underground numismatic circles are compiling image databases of known specimens, each classified by error type, weight deviation, dye alignment, rim distortion, and even sonic resonance. Because yes, some dimes emit subtly different frequencies when dropped on a metal surface, and a subset of researchers now suspect internal structure variations, layered planchets, voids, maybe even composite blanks tested during pandemic-related resource shortages. This theory only gained steam after a cache of uncirculated 2022D dimes was discovered with unmatched mint luster, but fine concentric striations spiraling inward toward the center, almost as if the dyes themselves had been misaligned at a molecular level, or worse, intentionally manipulated to hide another image beneath the surface. And then came the dime with no Roosevelt at all, just an empty field with a blurred central zone, an unexplainable ghost coin that passed metallurgical analysis, but remains a mystery of striking mechanics. The collector who found it was offered confidentiality agreements by private parties claiming to represent research firms, and has since disappeared from public forums. This event alone triggered a flurry of reports from others who believe they hold transitional strikes, unauthorized dye marriages, or even phantom class errors, coins never officially recorded, likely struck in moments of machine recalibration or shift changes, when oversight is weakest. And here lies the heart of the obsession, the notion that somewhere in the seams of bureaucracy and machinery, a door opened and through it slipped something not just rare, but wrong in the most fascinating way. How many of these dimes exist? How many have already passed through vending machines, unnoticed, spent on gas station gum, or fallen between couch cushions? Could there be one still clinking at the bottom of a laundromat's change dispenser? Or buried in a parking lot under layers of time? The mystery isn't just in the coins. It's in the system that birthed them, the blind spots we didn't see coming, the human element inside an otherwise automated operation, where pressure, secrecy, fatigue, or rebellion could twist the dial of fate just enough to mint a question that no one wants to answer, but we have to chase it, because the story isn't done. Not when new variations are still turning up, not when dye markers don't match existing records. and not when even the grading companies can't agree on what qualifies as normal. For this dime, it's become more than a coin, it's become a puzzle, a riddle passed from hand to hand, daring anyone to solve it, and as long as there are drawers left unopened, bankrolls unsearched, and eyes sharp enough to notice the unnoticeable, this story isn't over. In fact, we may have only just begun to realize what the 2022D Roosevelt Dime truly represents: a silent fracture in the machinery of trust, a minted whisper of chaos wrapped in 10-cent steel, and a chance, however small, to hold history in your hand without even knowing it. Next, we unravel a tale buried beneath the surface of something so deceptively mundane it slips through fingers daily, unnoticed by millions, yet capable of unearthing secrets long buried in the vaults of the U.S. Minta. 2013D Roosevelt Dime. Struck in Denver during a time of quiet transition and whispered uncertainty, now emerging as one of the most confounding numismatic enigmas of the modern age, and the question that haunts every collector who stumbles across its abnormalities, is simple yet spine-chilling. What if a small mistake made it one of the rarest coins ever struck? Not because of what was added, but because of what was concealed, because what began as whispers on obscure coin forums and half-dismissed anecdotes from roll hunters soon escalated into a fevered obsession when dimes began surfacing with misaligned mint marks, ghosted facial features, razor-thin doubling on the lettering, and planchet blemishes that seemed less like accidents and more like intentional marks, some bearing faint overlays of images that didn't belong to any Roosevelt dime issued before or after, a fact that begged the question: was this a rogue die, a forgotten prototype, or something far more elusive, a die trial that escaped destruction, buried in routine circulation like a ghost note in a symphony, hiding in plain sight and waiting to be discovered by eyes sharp enough to detect the off angle of a serif or the unnatural shimmer of an overpolished field that should have been rejected at first glance but somehow passed through layers of quality control, suggesting either a catastrophic breakdown in mint protocol or, more alarmingly, a conscious decision to look the other way. Why then did some specimens exhibit unusual reading patterns with incomplete edge milling or odd spacing between reads, inconsistent with the standardized machinery used in Denver that year? And what of the dimes that bore subtle die clashes, so faint they were almost spiritual in appearance, the kind of anomaly that suggests a collision of obverse and reverse? Dies without a planchet between, a mechanical failure that shouldn't have occurred unless dies were being misused or tested outside of official production timelines. And then there's the matter of the inverted features found on a handful of dimes distant. Ghostly impressions of letters and devices from unrelated coin series whispering across Roosevelt's face or the torch, as if the die once bore another identity entirely and had not been properly wiped clean before being put into service for regular mintage, leading some to believe these coins are the corrupted descendants of cancelled experimental dies from prior design overhauls. And when collectors began comparing these anomalies side by side, things only got stranger, because the inconsistencies were not consistent. No two flawed dimes seemed to have the same combination of features. The die cracks splintered across Liberty's head in different places, the doubling showed up on different letters, and in some cases the mint mark itself, the humble D that should signify nothing more than Denver, appeared off-center, curved, faded, or most disturbingly overstruck with the shadow of another letter entirely, one that did not belong. And while the U.S. Mint has remained characteristically silent, releasing only boilerplate statements about acceptable tolerances, the fact that Freedom of Information Act requests related to production logs for the 2013D dime were denied under internal security measures raised a tidal wave of speculation that this coin may have been part of something never meant to reach the public. A theory strengthened by internal whistleblower testimony leaked anonymously in 2017, which described a halted redesign initiative involving alternate obverse layouts and compositional tests using die alloys not approved by Congress, and though the claims remain unconfirmed, metallurgical analyses from third-party labs on anomalous dimes recovered from circulation show microimpurities in the coin's surface structure inconsistent with standard Denver output from that fiscal year, pointing to the possibility that a batch of pre-production blanks or alternate die hardenings were somehow introduced into the normal minting process. And as this web deepens, as the data points stack and contradict and confound, a parallel story begins to emerge not just of minting errors but of obsession itself. As collectors dedicate entire rooms, entire lives, to studying these anomalies, scanning for slight indentations near the date, fingerprint-like swirls in the fields under Roosevelt's jawline, even electromagnetic irregularities recorded using DIY scanning rigs, some going as far as developing spectral imaging systems to analyze coins under infrared and ultraviolet light, where some of the strangest discoveries have surfaced, embedded specks that react to UV exposure with a dull glow, reminiscent of anti-counterfeit measures not found in U.S. coinage, but rumored to have been explored in experimental security series, a revelation that triggered a subset of experts to theorize that the 2013D Roosevelt Dime may have been caught in the crosswinds of a classified production project, perhaps a joint venture between Treasury and Homeland Security, or a long-abandoned test to implement traceable coinage through embedded optical signatures. And if that sounds outlandish, then explain the handful of dimes with perfectly centered, shallow depressions beneath the torch's flame barely visible to the naked eye, but unmistakably present under low-angle lighting like microstamps from a different world. And still the questions rage on. How did these coins pass final inspection? How many were struck? And could it be that some were never officially struck at all, but instead hand-fed into press systems after hours by individuals with motives long forgotten or still unfolding, and then came the so-called vanishing Liberty dime, discovered in late 2019 in a box of state quarters where the word liberty is entirely absent, not weak, not faint, not filled in but gone, the field clean as if etched by a laser, though no tool marks were found under scope. And once again, the mint provided no answer, only silence. And in that silence, the myth of the 2013D Roosevelt dime has only grown louder as treasure hunters, experts, and digital sleuths continue to chase leads, decode inconsistencies, and map error clusters across geographic regions in an effort to determine whether these anomalies were isolated, or if perhaps thousands more are still out there, hidden in circulation, passed from hand to hand like cursed artifacts, tiny steel, keys to a story too massive for any one collector to contain. And with every new discovery, every coin with an extra flame, a flattened ear, a doubled mint mark, or a faded motto, the question grows more urgent. Is this a rogue artifact or a message from within the mint itself? A buried signal left by someone trying to tell us that what we think we know about U.S. coin production is only the surface layer of a much deeper, much darker truth, and if so, how many more coins like this are hiding in plain sight, dismissed as average, unexamined? Still waiting for the moment when the right set of hands and the right set of eyes unlock a hidden legacy that could finally blow the lid off one of the most perplexing and tightly wound mysteries in the history of American coinage. And as that lid begins to rattle under the weight of mounting evidence, what comes next isn't just another chapter in a coin story. It's a reckoning with everything we thought was bulletproof about modern minting protocols. Because the 2013D Roosevelt dime doesn't just challenge the idea of error, it dismantles the illusion of perfection that the mint has long projected, pulling us into a deeper, darker maze where craftsmanship collides with chaos, where legacy is entangled with lapse, and where secrecy isn't the exception but the design. And now, more chilling clues emerge. Like the dime found with Roosevelt's profile inexplicably rotated 3 degrees clockwise. A deviation so subtle most miss it, but when overlaid with standard images, the slippage becomes undeniable, raising serious questions about whether an entire series of obverse dies was misaligned, and then quietly retired without ever acknowledging the breach. And that alone would be enough to rattle numismatic historians. But the story doesn't rest there. Because what if that same batch of misaligned obverse dies also carried forward a ghosted trace from a prior engraving pass, one intended for a commemorative design that was ultimately scrapped before production? The result being a spectral layering of design elements, partial eagles, fragmented lettering, slanted flares beneath the torch's base that have no place on a Roosevelt dime, yet continue to show up in clusters. Most commonly in the southwest United States, particularly in dimes pulled from armored truck shipments routed through Colorado, Texas, and New Mexico, a regional pattern that curiously overlaps with facilities once used for experimental coin testing and metallurgical R&D during earlier mint modernization programs, and when independent researchers compared several dozen of these cluster finds, they discovered irregularities not just in visual characteristics but in conductivity, suggesting either a deviation in metal purity or microstructural inconsistencies within the planchet itself, irregularities that would be virtually impossible to recreate post-mint, pointing to something far more dangerous: the deliberate or accidental inclusion of test blanks into standard production. A mistake or an act that may have compromised the integrity of hundreds, perhaps thousands of dimes before anyone realized what had happened, and as if that weren't unsettling enough, the deeper you go into the archives. Next, we dive headfirst into the darkest, most confounding corners of modern American coinage, into a coin so seemingly ordinary it vanished into circulation by the millions, yet now resurfaces as the center of a storm. What if a small mistake made it one of the rarest coins ever struck? A 1998D Roosevelt dime from the Denver Mint that, on the surface, should have marked nothing more than another year of business-as-usual production. But beneath its steel-gray luster hides a cascade of minting anomalies, mysteries, and spine-chilling irregularities that have turned this dime into a numismatic riddle with no final answer. Because from the moment the first collectors started whispering about subtle variations, Roosevelt's hairline showing a doubled impression, the torch's flame split like a reflection, the mint mark strangely misplaced or even inverted, the coin began to develop a mythos that outpaced logic, drawing in experts and amateurs alike, all trying to answer the same haunting question: how did this coin escape the mint's strict quality controls? And what exactly was happening inside the U.S. Mint in 1998 that allowed not one, but dozens, maybe hundreds of flawed specimens to quietly slip into the hands of the unsuspecting public, starting a decades-long hunt that has only intensified? With each new bizarre discovery, dimes with shadowed devices that suggest die clashes so severe they left phantom outlines of the reverse pressed faintly into Roosevelt's cheek, dimes with ghostly impressions of numbers beneath the date as if struck over a prior year's die, and perhaps most eerily of all, dimes with no mint mark at all or mint marks that do not match any known Denver punch from that era, leading some to speculate that the mint used experimental or repurposed dies during a chaotic stretch in mid-1998, when production quotas spiked unexpectedly due to regional coin shortages, pushing machinery and personnel beyond their limits and into error-prone territory, where strange things began to happen, striking misalignments so severe they cut the rim off the torch, inverted die setups that flipped the orientation of key devices, and planchet flaws that caused Roosevelt's profile to warp slightly, resulting in a jawline curve never documented in official mint blueprints, all feeding into theories that a batch of coins may have been produced during unofficial downtime, or under test conditions for new die steels. Perhaps even as a quiet attempt to salvage aging press equipment before the looming upgrades of the early 2000s, and if this sounds far-fetched, consider the confidential report leaked in 2004 by a former Mint engineer who claimed that several 1998D dies were pulled early due to unresolvable inconsistencies in strike quality and unauthorized field anomalies. Language so vague and bureaucratic it practically begs for reinterpretation, and yet no follow-up was ever issued, no public report ever published, which only fueled the fire for collectors who had already started mapping error specimens geographically, discovering that a disproportionate number of the strangest examples, those with missing letters, rotational errors, and even partial mirror strikes, originated from coin rolls distributed across Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, sparking rumors that a clandestine batch of flawed dimes was dumped into circulation quietly, possibly to avoid recall costs or press attention. And while the Mint has never confirmed such a release, the silence speaks volumes, especially when paired with first-hand accounts from longtime Bank employees who reported receiving unusual sealed rolls during that period heavier than normal, oddly packed, and sometimes missing outer labeling, while collectors began sharing photos of Roosevelt dimes with impossible features, doubled flames, disjointed lettering, rim dents too uniform to be accidental, and even one coin where the torch's base morphs subtly into what looks like an olive branch. A design element abandoned decades earlier, which has led to outlandish but increasingly plausible theories that old, rejected dies from previous series may have been accidentally or deliberately recycled during a shortage of materials. And as the number of anomalies grows, the legend only deepens, drawing in metallurgists, historians, and cryptographers who analyze these coins not just for flaws, but for patterns, codes, and meanings, like the subtle V-shaped scratch marks some believe were placed intentionally as signatures, or Roosevelt profiles that appear thinner, elongated, or strangely positioned off-center by millimeters, but still within the mint's margin of error, making them legally undetectable but unmistakably strange, and all of this is compounded by the curious timing of 1998 itself, a transitional year at the U.S. Mint, just before the release of the 50-state quarters program, when resources were shifting, staffing was inconsistent, and operations were clouded by the pressure to modernize. Conditions ripe for chaos and cover-up alike, and when you fold in reports of misfiled production logs, deleted emails, and conflicting strike tallies from internal spreadsheets versus public mint records, a more sinister possibility takes shape. What if the 1998D Roosevelt dime wasn't just a victim of error, but the product of internal sabotage or unauthorized experimentation? A test run disguised as routine mintage, never intended to be detected, let alone survive into the hands of collectors who would notice that the lettering on E pluribus unum sometimes appears subtly italicized, or that the curvature of the rim varies by region, or that under infrared light, certain specimens reveal compression points inconsistent with known die calibration settings from that year. And as these clues accumulate quietly, relentlessly, they weave a narrative that no longer feels like coincidence but like design, or at least consequence, and the more this dime is studied, the clearer it becomes that it doesn't fit neatly into the catalog categories of known mint errors, nor does it adhere to standard production timelines or archival records, meaning, we are looking at a coin that may represent a moment in time when the mint lost control of its own process, whether by mechanical failure, procedural oversight, or something far more intentional, and the result is a series of coins that refuse to be categorized, refuse to be dismissed, and continue to pop up in the most unlikely places: penny jars, estate sales, forgotten vending machine trays, each new discovery reigniting the obsessive question, how many are out there, and what do they prove? Because in a world built on uniformity and procedure, the 1998D Roosevelt dime is a crack in the concrete, a wild, stubborn deviation that slipped through the filters and emerged with secrets etched into its face, daring us to notice, to chase, to never stop turning over change with a glance just a bit too long, just in case the next one tells us something the last one didn't. The rabbit hole only deepens. Because the further we follow the trail of the 1998D Roosevelt dime, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just a story of mechanical mishaps or accidental oversight. This is a layered, living conspiracy of metal and mystery, a saga stitched together by scattered clues across time, distance, and denomination, where every oddity reveals not a conclusion but another question, another crack in the armor of institutional certainty, another whisper that something went fundamentally wrong at the Denver Mint in that pivotal year. What if that one dime you tossed into a parking meter was actually part of an unauthorized test series, a covert production run done in the shadows of standard operations, possibly under the pretense of calibration, possibly under direct instruction from someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who wanted these coins to exist, not as currency, but as relics of a process gone rogue? And we start to see that the anomalies of the 1998D are not isolated. No, they're predictive, linked together by strange echoes, Roosevelt's jawline shifting shape from dime to dime, as if molded from a deteriorating die that was allowed to run far too long. Inscriptions rising and falling like seismic waves across the coin's surface, revealing inconsistent pressure data and suggesting dies mounted on unstable machinery. And the mint mark, the infamous D on some specimens found twisted sideways, doubled faintly or replaced entirely by a mark that resembles no known mint font, igniting the theory that alternate punches were tested without documentation. And while the mint continued to issue stoic silence to the growing tide of inquiry, some former employees retired, relocated, and no longer bound by contracts began anonymously posting fragments of their stories, midnight shifts where audit teams never showed up, unexplained reruns of strike batches that had already cleared QA, and crates of rejected blanks mysteriously signed off as acceptable variants. And that's where it gets chilling, because if those blanks improperly annealed or compositionally experimental, or used anyway, then what we're seeing in the field today isn't just a flawed coin, it's a catalog of suppressed innovation, an unacknowledged beta test of materials, methods, or even minting philosophies that were never greenlit for public distribution. And the deeper this narrative spirals, the more collectors report finding dimes that defy even the most liberal classifications of known errors, like the dime with Roosevelt's eye missing entirely, cleanly absent, like it was never carved into the die to begin with. And under scope, the void shows microlathing marks consistent with early design stage tooling, implying this wasn't a worn die, but a prototype struck without authorization. Next, we enter the shadowy corridors of American numismatic history, where mystery strikes in metal and the ordinary hides the extraordinary. And the coin at the heart of this storm is the unassuming yet impossibly enigmatic 2021P Roosevelt Dime, anomaly born from a moment in time already fraught with global instability, pandemic-related labor shortages, and overwhelming production pressure at the Philadelphia Mint. A perfect storm of stressors that may have opened a window just wide enough for the unthinkable to happen. And what if a small mistake made it one? Of the rarest coins ever struck, not through fanfare or design intention, but through a convergence of flaws so complex, so precise in their chaos, that the 2021P Roosevelt Dime now stands not as a product of error, but as a coded artifact of institutional fracture. Because when the first of these dimes emerged, seemingly ordinary but undeniably off, it sparked questions few could answer. Why did Roosevelt's portrait appear subtly shifted, his features unnaturally stretched, as if drawn from a corrupted digital file or carved by an uncalibrated die? And why did some specimens bear mint marks that looked recessed, flattened, or ghosted to the point of near invisibility so faint they disappeared under certain lighting, yet clearly present under others? Inconsistencies that couldn't be replicated under known striking conditions, leading experts to suspect that the dies themselves were worn, misaligned, or possibly experimental. But why would experimental dies be in active use, and why during 2021 of all years, a period when the Mint was scrambling to maintain production while also battling rolling staff shortages and logistical delays, a time when machine maintenance schedules were altered, new die sets rushed into service, and errors could have been overlooked not by negligence but by necessity. And that's exactly when the 2021P dime slipped through the cracks. Because beneath its shiny surface, the signs were everywhere: die clashes, leaving subtle impressions of reverse features on the obverse. Roosevelt's neck showing signs of raised lines inconsistent with the die engraving, and certain specimens exhibiting what can only be described as echoed lettering where parts of liberty or the motto appeared doubled not laterally, as in traditional doubling but in faint vertical offsets, almost like ghost images layered beneath the primary strike, prompting metallurgists to question whether this was the result of a hubbing misalignment or a deeper die fatigue problem never publicly addressed. And then there were the coins with missing designer initials, no JS, beneath Roosevelt's neck. No visible signature of the engraver, erased entirely or reduced to a microscopic bump barely distinguishable under 40x magnification, and such a loss isn't a random oversight but a fundamental deviation from minting protocol, suggesting either extreme overpolishing of the die or a lapse in hub preparation. either of which raises critical questions about how these dyes were created, who authorized their use, and why the Philadelphia Mint's official logs for March and April of that year show inconsistencies in dye replacement cycles and press shutdown. Reports data that should have matched output but instead reveals dead zones in production without clear explanation. And that gap is where the theories begin. Some believe these anomalies point to the unauthorized testing of laser-engraved dyes, part of a pilot program meant to modernize the minting process, while others claim the mint accidentally reintroduced old test hubs into active production, mistaking them for 2021 approved dyes amidst the chaos of pandemic delays, and still others whisper about deeper cover-ups, security clearances escalated for certain dye technicians, undisclosed internal memos referencing device alignment inconsistencies, and one anonymous former Mint employee who reported seeing dime hubs stored in trays labeled 2020 experimental do not circulate, only to later find them missing, signed out with no return record. And if that's true, then the 2021P Roosevelt Dime may not just be an error, it may be a breach, a coin that crossed a line it was never meant to reach. And as more flawed examples are unearthed in bank rolls and change jars, patterns begin to emerge. Roosevelt dimes with odd planchet flaws along the rim, where metal flow appears disrupted, pooling unevenly in a way consistent with low-pressure strikes or contaminated blanks, others with reverse designs that seem ever so slightly off-center while the obverse remains perfectly aligned, a mismatch that has experts scratching their heads because it implies a dye pairing mismatch, possibly between hubs not meant to coexist. And further analysis of weight and metallic composition reveals strange deviations in a small percentage of specimens, minuscule but real, hinting that certain batches may have used alternate planchet sources or prototype blanks introduced as emergency measures during raw material shortages, a move the Mint has never publicly acknowledged but aligns disturbingly well with the sudden disappearance of several thousand planchets from a contracted vendor's shipment log that same year, a discrepancy that has never been resolved. And the more collectors investigate, the stranger it becomes. Reports of micro scratches in identical patterns across different coins suggesting not wear but intentional laser etching. Roosevelt profiles that differ subtly in detail, with softer eyes or reshaped lips, as though multiple portrait designs were trialed during a limited print window. Even rumors of dimes discovered with no torch at all on the reverse, just smooth blankness beneath the inscriptions, a feature too clean to be an error yet too undocumented to be accepted as real. And one of the most compelling finds came from a collector in Ohio, who claims to have found a 2021P dime with the words E pluribus unum rotated 45 degrees clockwise and embedded into the rim itself, readable only under high magnification and lighting, as if an entire die pass occurred misaligned by some catastrophic degree and was somehow still struck into metal without jamming the press, an event theoretically impossible under normal operations, and yet there it was, examined by 3 independent parties and still unexplained. And perhaps most unsettling of all are the quiet disappearances. Rolls purchased from banks that later show obvious resealing, entire boxes of 2021P dimes, reportedly pulled from distribution in the Northeast Corridor with no official recall notice issued, and grading companies declining to slab certain variants without offering full public reasoning, citing non-standard anomalies, a phrase as vague as it is chilling. All of which feeds the fire that maybe, just maybe, there's a deeper truth behind the 2021P dime, a truth that stretches beyond mechanical flaw into institutional mystery, and the obsession surrounding it has only grown with private research. Groups forming machine learning models scanning high-res coin images for pattern recognition, amateur sleuths logging geographic trace maps of where certain anomalies surface, and conspiracy threads speculating everything from foreign tampering to internal sabotage, while still the coin continues to surface innocently, innocuously, and each time daring someone new to see what others have missed, to notice the slight ridge around the flame's base, or the break in Roosevelt's collar that doesn't appear on standard dies, or the faint, almost imperceptible doubling of the number 2 in the date that seems to shimmer with each turn of the coin. like an echo of the truth trying to escape, and so the question persists. Relentless and unresolved, how did these coins get out? What system failed? Who saw what and said nothing? And how many more are still circulating among the masses, dismissed as ordinary, waiting silently for someone to pick them up, tilt them to the light, and realize that this isn't just a dime, it's a message in metal, a whisper from within the walls of the mint itself, and the hunt, driven by curiosity, obsession, and the insatiable hunger to uncover what's been buried, is far from over.